All right, let's break down what was, without a doubt, one of the most volatile months in recent memory. We're talking about a month where a brand new conflict in the Middle East sent these massive shockwaves through the entire global economy. Everything from oil prices to long-standing political alliances was just thrown into chaos.
You know, that quote really just sums it all up, doesn't it? Out of nowhere, this sudden military conflict became the single biggest thing driving the markets. It created this huge amount of volatility and a level of uncertainty that, frankly, left investors completely guessing. So how on earth did it all begin?
Well, it all started with a single military spark, one that very quickly ignited a full-blown regional firestorm.
And what's so wild here is just the speed of it all. I mean, look at this timeline. February 27th, President Trump gives the green light. The very next day, February 28th, coordinated U.S. and Israeli strikes are already hitting Iran. In the aftermath of that, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is a casualty. And then, Iran retaliates. But not just any retaliation. They launched this unprecedented missile barrage at Israel, and for the first time in history, all 6 GCC states at the same time. Just boom, boom, boom.
So, you see, this initial military action, it wasn't just a strike. It was really the first domino to fall in a very long line. It set off this chain reaction that will be felt way, way beyond the Middle East. And the first place that reaction hit? Well, it was one of the most sensitive parts of the entire global economy.
Yep, the conflict went right for the world's most critical economic artery, the oil supply.
The really big move came on March 4th. That's when Iranian forces basically closed the Strait of Hormuz. They went right after a massive choke point for global trade. But you might be wondering, just how vital is that one little waterway?
Well, this number really puts it into perspective. A full 20%. That's 1/5 of all global seaborne oil and natural gas passing through this one single strait. So yeah, taking that offline, that was guaranteed to have an absolutely massive impact.
And that impact wasn't delayed. It was immediate. The International Energy Agency came out with this forecast, a staggering drop of 8 million barrels per day from the global supply. I mean, a shock of that size is it's almost unheard of.
In fact, the IEA didn't mince words at all. They came right out and called it the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Not just in a decade or in our lifetimes, but in the entire history of the market. Wow.
And look, this wasn't just some abstract problem for traders on Wall Street. These were real-world consequences for everyday people. You had Pakistan advising cricket fans to literally watch games from home just to save fuel. Hundreds of petrol stations in Australia were reporting shortages. We saw fuel-related flight cancellations all the way from Vietnam to New Zealand. And airlines everywhere were having to reroute, which meant longer, more expensive flights for everyone.
So you've got this massive economic crisis brewing, right? But it didn't stop there. It very quickly morphed into a political one, and that put some really intense strain on long-standing Western alliances.
And right at the center of all this friction was President Trump's approach. The way his administration handled the crisis and what it expected from its allies, well, it created some really deep divisions, especially inside of NATO.
And this is the statement that really threw gasoline on the fire. Instead of calling for a coordinated, unified response, President Trump basically invited allies to sort out the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz themselves. As you can imagine, that did not go over well.
The pushback from these allies was swift, and it was very specific. Spain, for instance, refused the use of its bases and airspace, and they even called the attack profoundly illegal. Italy denied the use of a key airbase, which forced U.S. bombers to reroute. France actually blocked Israeli transport planes carrying U.S. weapons from even entering its airspace. And even the UK, one of America's closest allies, was really hesitant at first. This was a very clear, very public fracture within the alliance.
Okay, so let's recap for a second. We've got a war, a massive oil crisis, and political alliances falling apart. So, how did the financial markets react to all this chaos? Well, with absolute whiplash.
Yeah, it's really no surprise that analysts were calling March one of the toughest months to trade ever. You had this crazy mix of war headlines, all this uncertainty, and really mixed messages coming from world leaders. It was basically a perfect storm for anyone trying to invest.
And this right here really captures the market's total split personality during the month. At first, the reaction was textbook risk-off panic mode. Oil prices surged, stocks tanked, and everyone fled to the safety of the US dollar.
But then, President Trump makes this kind of off-the-cuff remark, suggesting the whole war could be over in 2 or 3 weeks. And just like that, the market does a complete 180. It sparked this massive relief rally, with the S&P 500 adding about 3% and Japan's Nikkei surging over 5%.
But through all that volatility, the main driver was crystal clear. Just look at these numbers. Brent crude jumped over 41% in just 1 month. WTI crude, it skyrocketed by more than 50%. That incredible surge in oil was the engine behind almost every other move we saw in the market.
So the events of March didn't just cause a temporary panic. This wasn't just a blip on the radar. No, they fundamentally reshaped the entire global economic policy landscape and for a long time to come.
And here's the result of that reshaping. The crisis basically split the world's major central banks into 2 completely different camps. On one side, you had the hawkish group. Think the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan. They felt they had no choice but to fight this new energy-driven inflation. But on the other side, you had this more cautious group, like the US Fed and the Bank of England. They were much more worried about hurting economic growth. And having these 2 opposing strategies, well, it created a really messy and unpredictable environment for everyone.
So, after a month that completely redefined alliances, reset what the markets expected, and triggered the biggest oil shock in history, we're left with this one critical question. The world kind of stumbled through this crisis, but it came out the other side way more fractured and uncertain. So the real question is, what happens when the next shock hits?